All right, welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Prehm and Jared Mack here on this Monday edition. Hey, Jared, I don't know if you've noticed. I'm sure you did. Weather has changed.
Oh yeah,
Spring is like
that's
finally
sprung.
here. Spring game is on Saturday, and like 2 weeks ago, it looked like it was going to rain. Now it's going to be potentially 80 degrees. It's a beautiful thing. Recruits are going to come through Eugene this week, this weekend. We're going to have a recruiting show, a show devoted primarily to recruiting later on this week. We will touch a little bit on the mailbag today. We want to make sure Eric's on that one as well. But to start off the mailbag, we're going to go to baseball. There's a question here from Theo. Theo Winter asks, and specifically to you, Sir Jared. The
That would make
team
some
is
sense.
looking. The team is looking good thus far. What's your win-loss prediction for this upcoming week of games, starting on the 25th, with 2 against Gonzaga, then the series against ASU, and then 1 game in Corvallis? Will the Bats stay hot?
Oh well, I mean it's going to be a tough week no matter what. The two against Gonzaga, I think, is they're back-to-back midweek games on a Tuesday, Wednesday. Those are never easy. Last weekend, Oregon had, or 2 weeks ago, Oregon had Tuesday, Wednesday against San Francisco, and they swept that. So that's a step in the right direction. They're 3-2 overall in the season, and midweek games with losses to Niagara, and then last week against Portland. That Portland loss was unfortunate, but things are looking up. Like Theo said in the question, they go 2-2 this past week. They get a series win over Cal. I thought that was a pretty gritty performance from the program overall. So now you come home, you have a long little homestand before going to Oregon State next weekend, and then Arizona State is surprisingly one of the best teams in the Pac-12. I did not see that coming. But yeah, they're in second place, I believe, in the Pac-12, only behind Stanford. Um, I'm going to look that up real quick because I didn't have it pulled up. This is poor podcasting. So I know they're now first place. They're 13-4 in conference. Stanford is 13-5. Oregon and Southern California are tied for third at 11-7. Arizona State was not a program that I or a lot of people expected to be any good this season. I expected their bats to be good because they were last season. They have been in years past. This season, the bats have been way better than advertised, and the pitching has come alive a bit. And they're riding that momentum, and they're one of the surprise teams. I think Oregon will let the rest of the conference figure out if they are any good or not, because their conference schedule so far, Arizona State's conference schedule, hasn't been the best. It's kind of been against the bottom dwellers of the conference before turning up against some of the better teams in the conference coming up, starting with Oregon. If I had to give a prediction on the week, I'd go 4-1. I think they'd drop one to Arizona State, but sweep the Gonzaga series. Even though Gonzaga is a good program, they're just not. They're just not that good this season, and that shows in their record. I think they're 14-22, and then Arizona State. I think it's going to be hard to win a PK. For whatever reason, Oregon's pitchers do much better at PK than at the road, and that's been a year or a multiple season long thing. So I expect Logan Mercado to do better on a Saturday against this lineup. So give me a 4-1 week, and then they move up in the overall the top 25.
Now, I got a question for you specifically as well. With 26-12 record, look, we've seen more baseball talk trickle in here. Part of that's uh, the better awareness. You've done a really good job covering this team, and there's more interest now with it. With that comes with winning too. What's kind of the postseason outlook right now? We're about 2/3 of the way through the season,
Mm-hmm.
thereabouts, and we're starting. I saw something like I think maybe last Friday that was some projections for regionals and whatnot. What is Oregon playing for right now? Because we're starting to get to that point where it becomes a subject.
Yeah, at this point, I think Oregon will. Unless they go defeated for the rest of the season, which I would be very surprised to see. I think that they're going to be a postseason team. I think they've locked that up at this point. They've been hovering around like the 20 to 25 in the national rankings. It's just because they'll take one step forward and then two steps back every time they're ranked. But they're still a very good program. Pitching is obviously worrisome. I've talked about that at length before. But what they're going to be fighting for now is to become a regional host. And so what that means for those that are unfamiliar, NCAA baseball has like a March Madness tournament. And instead of having neutral locations, the top 12, I think it is, top 12 seeds in the country will host a regional. And a regional is comprised of 4 teams, double elimination, and then you move to the super regional. And the super regional is going to be held at the higher seeded facilities. And that'll be, you move through that, and then you go through the College World Series where it's held in Omaha for the final 6 teams, 8 teams. So Oregon is fighting to be a regional host. They were a regional host in 2021, the year after the pandemic season or shortened season. Last season, they went to Louisville as a 2 seed, I believe it was. And so this year, they're going to be fighting for a 1 seed, and that obviously helps a lot. This is a very hitter-friendly environment. Oregon knows it and has been here ever since. So that's what they're fighting for at this point. And I think they have a rather favorable schedule down the road. They only have one more against Oregon State, which is next Tuesday. They face Arizona State, which is going to be a tough one, and USC, which is another good program. But both of those are at home. All the hard series this season have been at home, including Stanford and UCLA and Oregon State. So it's pretty favorable for Oregon going forward. But if they keep winning, if they keep doing their job like they have been in the last 3 weeks, then they should be a regional host. You're on mute, Matt.
I forgot. I was getting the next question all teed up, and there we go. All right. I'm not used to Eric having to do Eric's job on the mailbag, so I apologize. John Knowlton, what are the chances Oregon takes both Van Buren and Moga as QBs in the 2024 class? It seems like taking one and going after a top QB in the transfer portal might make more sense. There's a couple things here. One, Michael Van Buren was on campus in Eugene a couple weeks ago. He has now announced he will be here for the spring game. He's a 4-star quarterback out of Maryland. He's the 11th best player at that position for the quarterback spot in 2024. Second, Luke Moga is a 3-star quarterback from Phoenix in Arizona, Sunny Slope High School. 25 scholarship offers, was going to commit on the 28th of April, the day before the spring game. He was here this past weekend. He has now since told media outlets that he's maybe not going to do that. And now there's a potential, according to Max Torres of Sports Illustrated, I haven't been able to confirm this yet or not, but he's also considering coming back to Eugene again for the second straight weekend. I don't know if Luke's tweeted it out or not, but that sets up an interesting dynamic where these are 2 quarterbacks. Oregon's trending in the right direction for both. They're both going to be here in Eugene within, twice within basically a 3-week span. The question then becomes, should they take both? Could they take both, or should they go one and one transfer portal? I think the answer could be both, Jared. If the staff feels like one of the younger quarterbacks on scholarship on roster, which would be Ty Thompson or Austin Novosad, if the staff feels like, hey, we know they're not the guy right now, you could potentially take both and go get a portal guy in the offseason when Bo graduates, and you bring in a portal guy. You've got one of the other young scholarship quarterbacks, and you got 2 freshmen. Or if you feel like Ty Thompson or Austin Novosad can be the guy, you go take one of these 2 high school preps, and then you go find a portal guy. I think that's the question. Right now, I don't think they take both, but I think the discussion has to be had, and it's probably the chances of it happening probably are better than what it was maybe a month ago, 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
I
not to
think
say that it's like likely though.
no, yeah, I 100% understand what you're saying, and I agree. I think the only situation where they take both is if this staff and Dan Lanning and Will Stein have full confidence in either Ty Thompson or Austin Novosad to take the reins going into next season. And if they do, then yeah, I could see them taking both. These are both good prospects, and they're both making back-to-back trips, out of their own pockets, unofficial visits to Oregon for, excuse me, this past weekend and then the spring game. That bodes well if you're just reading the tea leaves from what Oregon probably is trying to do with both of these quarterbacks. But it all comes down to what Oregon thinks of Ty Thompson and his ability to run an offense for next season. And I guess I would throw Austin Novosad in there, but I would be lean partial to Ty just because of his experience and his last couple seasons within the program as the number one guy going into next season. And if you disagree, that's fine, but that's just how I look at it. Or they're I don't know, maybe they're planning for Ty to hit the portal or someone like that, and so that they are going to bring in both and grab a grad transfer or transfer quarterback from the portal. I think there's a lot of possibilities that go on with the quarterback situation, and as we saw last season with who entered the portal, if Oregon is really into getting somebody in the portal, I don't think there's going to be any shortages of guys who have been successful at other programs who could come in and hop into Will Stein's system and be successful. I think there will be plenty of options there if that is what Oregon ultimately decides to do. I just think it's an interesting kind of last 72 hours for the quarterback recruiting position room at Oregon with the news of Moga and Van Buren just both making the weekend trip out here to Oregon, which is a good sign already. And then on visit, deciding to come back next weekend, unofficial. So they're paying for that visit to come for the spring game, which I know that Oregon is probably the last spring game in the country for how late it is. But, it's one thing if these are official visits and Oregon is paying for it, but these aren't official visits. And both of them are coming, which I think if that is what is true, if Moga does decide to return for another weekend, and then it's interesting. I'm interested in the philosophy that Dan and Will Stein and Marshall Malco have been coming up with for the recruiting for their quarterback room.
What's interesting is they're also like MBV is like 5'10", and he's a very small quarterback. But like we've seen across college football the last couple of seasons, small quarterback that hasn't stopped small quarterbacks from being elite. Maybe one of the top 4 or 5 picks in this year's draft should be Bryce Young, and he's like 5'10", 5'11" on a good day. So the fact that you need like a 6'5" quarterback now, it's starting to go away. It's still always a positive if you can find one. And then Luke Moga is a 3-star recruit, and you look at him and he's ranked. We have him as the 52nd best quarterback in the country, but you look at the schools that have offered him scholarships, and you see the places that he's been, and you can quickly tell that while his ranking isn't very high, the schools interested show that he's a pretty talented guy, and he's grown leaps and bounds this offseason already. So maybe they're banking on 2 here. They're not the high profile top 5 quarterback prospect that we've seen Oregon try and go after the last couple of seasons. They've been close to getting them. They had one at Dante Moore last year, and they flipped the last second to UCLA. But like you said, the quarterback position is ever changing, and maybe they just view the fact that the likelihood that whoever they signed in 2024 starts in the 2024 season is very low, because whether it's Ty Thompson or Austin Novosad or a transfer portal guy, maybe they're looking at this like, hey, we want to get a talented player, the best talent we can get, but we're okay getting 1 or maybe 2 guys that we can maybe develop for a couple of years to get them into the system.
Yeah, and I don't think we've asked Will Stein what his philosophy is and how many guys he wants to keep in the quarterback room. Like, I mean, it's hard to do it in this modern era of transfer portal college football, but Ohio State for the last couple of seasons has had 4 or 5 scholarship quarterbacks in their room, and if Oregon adds 2 here and keeps Ty and then keeps Novosad and then enters the portal for something, that's 5 right there, and or maybe they take both and they keep Ty as we've discussed, but. I think it's going to come down to what Will Stein is comfortable with, what he wants to do, what he likes in his quarterback room. I don't necessarily feel like he had the facilities for that at UTSA, but here at Oregon, he's going to be able to figure out exactly what he wants in an offense and then bring it to the Ducks. So I think that's something that we could ask him the next time we talk to him, but we're probably never going to talk to him again at media. So that's the unfortunate part.
Yeah, we may get him in August, and
August. We'll get him in August for sure.
We'll get him in August, and then there's maybe the possibility that could be the very last time we ever talk to him because,
in general, yeah.
I mean, what if Oregon balls out and some school comes calling, "Hey, come be our head coach," just like Kenny Dillingham. Yeah. See you later. That could very well happen. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll jump into the second half of the podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm here, Jared Mack on the show. And next question goes to a Dan Lanning question from Dr. Quacks. We got a Dan Lanning shout out of Devin Jackson. What other shout outs have you taken note of? And who else appears to be making some strides? I think it's notable, Jared, that Dan has twice now mentioned Trayshawn Holden and Tez Johnson during Saturday post-scrimmage press conferences. Or maybe that was one of them was maybe a Monday or Tuesday film review. But I think both times now he's mentioned just Trayshawn Holden making some plays, showing his playmaking ability. He's referenced Tez Johnson as well, and Tez's ability to bring speed to the table. I think those are the two that I immediately kind of look at. But it was notable that he did say that Devin Jackson's had a really good spring. He's always been a really good, a really fast player. He's playing faster and faster. So it's fun to see him, but feel really good about having a guy like him here. You have any thoughts on other shout outs or other notable entrances here?
Yeah, the Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden ones are kind of noticeable. The thing with Dan is when he shouts guys out, I think it's more or less just coach speak, and there's something to take into consideration, but there's also probably not. I think when he shouts out guys, it's really based on whatever question he's asked. It could be a direct question about Tez or Trayshawn, and then he answers it. But I think it's important that he's talking about Tez and Trayshawn Holden. Those are guys that need to step up this season. He said a couple times that Trayshawn is a possession receiver guy, which we all expected. He's made note about Tez's speed multiple times. I'm trying to think of other guys. The Devin Jackson one was very nice as the president of the Devin Jackson fan club. So that was a good thing to hear. He started out the year by shouting out. Yeah, Connerly to start the season. Bossa as well. I think he's mentioned a couple times that Jamal has been doing fine at Jamal Hill's been doing fine at linebacker. So I think those are all positive things. There's been, I don't know if there's been any other significant shout outs other than just specific answers to specific questions about players. If my memory serves me correct.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And he's not one to, I think, hey, what's Jim Smith? How is he performing? Is he getting ready to, to take that next step? Like he's not going to just play into and give you that quote unless.
No. And the Devin Jackson shout out was during a Justin Jacobs question. It's like, hey, how's Justin Jacobs performing this year? Well, Devin Jackson's been great. So that's what you're going to get from Dan, and it is what it is. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Dan, if you're listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
He in the full quote. I'll read the full quote that leads to Devin Jackson. Then we'll go to the next one here. He was asked, "How has Justin Jacobs improved your linebacker room?" Yeah, Justin had a great play today. It was great to see. I think we have great competition in that room with Scoob, excuse me. That's Jamal Hill, Bossa, Justin, Connor Sowell, and there's just been a lot of guys that have been able to compete there and create great depth. Devin Jackson's had a really great spring. You know, he's always been a fast player. He's playing faster and faster, so it's fun to see him. But we feel really good about having a guy like him there. So it's kind of like he deviated away from the question, gave another shout out to another player, like Jared said. But that room certainly has its options with Jamal Hill, Bossa, Justin Jacobs, Sowell, and now potentially Devin Jackson. Spring game, quick note. I'm just curious of just seeing what we see from Harrison Taggart. Although Harrison's been hurt, so
we haven't seen him at practice for probably 2 weeks at this point.
Yeah. So actually, that point becomes mute because he's been hurt. I just realized that. Questions like, we haven't seen Harrison Taggart. Oh yeah, because he's hurt, or we just don't know why he's not there. All right, let's go to the next question. 205 Duck fan. What position group do you feel like Oregon has the best chance to rank in the highest in the nation at this year? I.e. sacks, interceptions, scoring, offense, sacks allowed like last year. Autzen Audibles. Well, that's a good question. My first thought is the offensive side of the football, and I would look at either Bo Nix doing something like a completion percentage, fewest interceptions, something that involves Bo Nix, or my second option would be the running back group. They finished sixth in the country in yards per carry at 5.52 on 508 total carries. They ran for 2,800 yards, 34 touchdowns, almost 40 touches a game. That's where my head would go to. If I had to definitively pick one, it would be Bo Nix doing something like a completion percentage or touchdown to interception ratio or what have you. And then if it wasn't going to be Bo, it would be something with Bucky and Noah, because I think those two guys are two of the best running backs in the country, and they're on the same team. So you're going to have a lot of production there. Defensively, that one could be a wild card. It could be all over the place, good or bad.
I don't think there's going to be any defensive number that's going to be the number one in the country. And I'll explain why. This is going to be a really hard year in the Pac-12 to have a good defense. I'll tell you what. There are probably 4 solid, maybe potential Heisman candidates if everything goes right for each individual team, in Williams, Penix, Nix, and Cam Rising. And then you have DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State, who I think should be really good there. And then whatever Chip Kelly draws up with either Dante Moore or their other quarterback, whose name isn't as significant as Dante Moore's. So for Oregon, I think that their defense is going to be improved. I think their pass rush is going to be much better. I think that their secondary, depending on who lines up where, could be significantly better. I think linebacker is still a question mark. I think I got to see more of them, like in actual game scenarios, which we haven't during practice so far, to really have an idea or really have an understanding of what they look like. So that'll be the spring game, hopefully. But even despite those upgrades, I don't know. I think the defense will look better on paper, but I don't know how much better on paper, because Oregon will have to go against Washington and USC this year, who are going to be two of the best offenses, not only in the conference, but probably in the entire country, if everything goes according to plan for those guys and everybody stays healthy. Offense, I think, should be right up there as it was last season. And I would look towards just overall points per game, overall scoring, team totals, yards per game. This is, Bo Nix and Bucky and Noah Whittington, Troy Franklin, all these guys going into their second year of knowing each other. So you had a half full offseason last season. You now have a full offseason this year to get even closer and get chemistry and go through plays, pre-snap recognitions, things like that. The running back thing kind of worries me, kind of concerns me because we don't really know what this offensive line is going to look like. And the reason why Bucky Irving wasn't like the world's best running back last season, at least on a national level, they didn't give him the ball enough. And by enough, I mean they were scoring so many points that he didn't have a chance to get that many rushes. So I think a yards per carry, though, like you mentioned, Matt, could be a good one as long as the offensive line holds up because both of these guys are really talented and they're going to have a lot of room to work with in the open field. And it's going to be difficult to bring these guys down. So that's one to look at. But to me, just overall scoring, yards per game, points per game, just anything that has something to do with team offense, team completion percentage, team total touchdowns, are probably the worst in the country. A field goal allowed or field goal attempted would be great as a number as well. Just general offensive numbers because I think this offense will hum again, but I wouldn't put too many on defense. If I had to do one defensive number, maybe interceptions. They were pretty high up in the country last season, but there's always going to be a team like Middle Tennessee State that has like 6 in a game, and it's just like the best in the country in that regard.
I think if there's going to be a defensive category, whether it's individual or team, it's probably more likely going to be an individual. And it's something that's just really hard to project. Like this guy is going to lead the country or lead the conference in passes broken up or interceptions. And that could be because he's a really great ball skill guy, or it could be like a Brian Addison, maybe, who is the tallest guy in the secondary probably.
Right.
And goes up and gets a bunch of tip balls spread out across 13 or 14 games. I don't know. It's going to be something like that where there's a little bit of skill. Well, there's a lot of skill involved in getting the interception, but there's also a factor of luck, which you can't account for. You can't project. And that happens. You see interceptions where the quarterback just throws it right at a guy, or, a guy scoops up a deflected pass. That's where it's going to have to be, I think, defensively, if they're going to get one. And the offensive line thing that you brought up, the new offensive line and impacting the offensive production at running the football. I agree. Like you have to factor that in, and that's why what you said too of they didn't give Bucky the ball a ton. It was always like 12 or 13 carries a game. It's probably why if Oregon does do something in the running department, it's probably going to be a team one. It's not going to be an individual, because as much as you or I would like to see a season where Bucky maybe gets 20 carries, I just don't think that's their style. I don't think they want to do that every single game.
No, I don't. It's pretty clear that they don't. This is not going to be a Mario Cristobal-led team where, like it was against Washington, where Travis Dye has 77 carries and like 240 yards. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be their run game is going to be based off their passing game, and their passing game is going to be based off their run game. It's going to be short, quick outs. It's going to be exactly what the offense was last season, where it sets each other up, and they're going to go off of that, and that's going to be great. And then Bo Nix is also going to take a couple handoffs here or there, preferably less than more if you're talking Nix. But I mean, I would love, like you said, I would love to see Bucky get 25 carries just to see the kind of numbers he could put up. But that with the running back room and how talented it is, there's no reason. Keep them all fresh.
Yeah, 100%. There's absolutely no reason to be leaning on one guy unless he's giving you some kind of like Kenyon Barner USC type day where every carry he's getting is 8 or 9, 10 yards. And it's like, we just got to keep giving him the ball. And you can't count for that. So, all right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. A little bit shorter of a pod, but hey, there's only 2 of us here. You can't have a third answer every single time. Eric hopefully will be back on the show on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we'll have another one. And then we'll have a special post-game edition spring game version on Saturday, talking all things Oregon football following the spring game. Recruiting is going to ramp up here this week. A lot happening on deckterritory.com. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Peace.